Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. Um, I'm David Lane, the program manager of the MIH for Startup program alongside Techstars. If you don't know, Techstars has 50 accelerators across the world. Our guest today used to run one of them out in Detroit. We invest in over 500 startups a year, and right now we have close to 3,000 startups in our portfolio. We're going to be running a very exciting program alongside MIH, very centered across EV, and I'm sure you guys seen it and you're tuning in today. Love to tell you more, and I'm bringing Joe, our MIH representative today, to talk about more on this program. So Joe, please tell us more.
All right. Thanks, David. Thanks for the introduction. So hello, everyone. My name is Joe Chang, Head of Marketing at MIH. So I'm super excited to see all of you here today. So I'll quickly share with you all who MIH is and why we're creating this program with Techstars. So MIH Consortium is a Foxconn initiative, and we're creating an open electric vehicle ecosystem that promotes collaboration in the mobility industry to lower entry barrier and accelerate innovation. And we currently have more than 2,400 members from around the world, and we work together with them to realize key technologies and develop reference designs and standards through our 14 working groups, such as electric powertrain systems, battery energy management, autonomous driving, smart cockpit. And with the reference design and standards, we create go-to-market opportunities together with Foxconn and our members. So MIH, we're super excited to be working with Techstars to create this MIH for Startups program to drive innovation with startups around the world, as we believe that startups will be the key to future EV innovation. So this MIH for Startups program runs from August to October. It was a demo day in November where we will be bringing the final teams to Taiwan for the demo day. And you'll have the chance to sit down with MIH to discuss proof of concept projects and meet with Foxconn investment team to discuss investment opportunities. So if you're a startup working on EV related areas, we would love to have you join the MIH for Startup program. And we'll be sharing the application link in the chat, and we'll have some time at the end to talk more about this program. So without further ado, let me give the floor back to Techstars.
Thank you, Joe. And here is the website of the program and the applications. So I'm going to pause here, scan the website, read more about the startup program, and apply if you think this fits you. So, and we'll also link in the chat, so don't worry about that. So scan it with your phone or link through the chat or ask questions. This is time for you. So I'll pause it for a bit. And that's good. So introduction for our speaker today. Ted used to be our managing director for our Detroit program. If you didn't know, he was the first person to start that mobility program out in Detroit. He set it all up. And also he's been investing in over 100 or so startups for the past few years. He's passionate about building and helping founders. And so without further ado, I'd love to introduce Joe to the stage. Ted to the stage. Sorry.
Hey, everyone. Excited to be here today. And yeah, happy to share some thoughts, ideas, insights, seeing this space over the last kind of 8 years evolve. Feel free, if there's any questions, to throw them kind of in the chat, try to make this more interactive. But really want to kind of talk about just how I've seen the mobility space evolve, opportunities for investment, maybe some like more general tips for founders kind of coming into the space and what to do there. I will say I'm bummed on the timing though. I wish when I was running the Techstars Mobility program, MIH was a partner. Just what they're trying to do globally really aligns with helping founders around the world, especially succeed in the mobility space, work with corporate partners. So definitely anyone that's building something now, that's a great potential partner for you to work with. So want to kind of maybe give a little background on kind of mobility, where did it come from, but what I saw in the innovation wise. So in 2014, December 2014, Techstars announced the Detroit Mobility Program. And we had 3 founding partners, Ford, Verizon, and Magna, global tier 1 supplier. And oddly enough, that was actually the same day that Detroit exited bankruptcy. And so there's a pretty cool article where the front page of the Detroit Free Press is Detroit exits bankruptcy, largest one in the US history. And then Techstars kind of comes to town with mobility startups. And I also thought that was really interesting, like juxtaposition, Detroit exiting bankruptcy and mobility startups, because it's kind of like starting to be maybe the rebirth of Detroit, like kind of this, whether it's Detroit 2.0 or 3.0 or whatever number it is, but just kind of this new energy in Detroit in 2014. And this is right on the cusp of this whole transformation from maybe kind of broad-based mobile apps and like IT infrastructure and automotive and all this like intersection of things. And so when we launched the program, I mean, early on, it was, what is mobility? It wasn't really well defined, especially like in the startup space. And then all of a sudden, Cruise gets acquired for $1 billion by GM, and everything is mobility now. And so quickly, within 9 months of there's a future here, mobility, thinking about it, to don't quite know what that means, to tons, millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars going into anything related to mobility, autonomy, EV, that sort of thing. And so that kind of like that first wave that I saw from an investment perspective was a bunch of money going into autonomy. And at the time, I think a lot of my sense of autonomy, and even to today, was autonomous cars are coming, but it's not all of a sudden autonomous cars are here and everything else disappears. To me, it was very similar to AWS. It may be similar to AWS and like websites going online, where I don't know if anyone remembers the Twitter fail whale back in the day. I don't know, the early, what is it, 20s, 2007, 8, 9, 10. Reliable infrastructure to host websites still wasn't quite a common thing. And so it was measured in uptime, like 99.999, depending on how many minutes, hours, or days websites would be down. And to me, that's what autonomy is. It's all about the edge cases. Like 99% of the time it works, but those other times when it doesn't work, whether it's the seconds, minutes, days, the crashes, that's that long tail. And we're going to see it probably in the next 10 years, like start to see really well-tuned autonomous systems that work and move there. And so that was kind of like this first wave, like 2015, 16 into 17. And then what I saw kind of start to emerge was as kind of this shift from, I called it like manufactured steel to service software. There was this kind of this rethinking of what is a vehicle or automotive thing, whether it's a bigger car or truck or a golf cart or scooters or wherever it may be. It was becoming, now these things are programmable. So you could program something with wheels to do something, whether it's like drive by itself or tell you its location, that sort of thing. And so that's when I started to see much more of a rise of electrification. And the electrification simplifies everything when you go from mechanical parts to batteries, like very similar to a laptop. Laptop is a battery and you can program all around it to do stuff. The vehicle is being simplified from combustion engines down to EV. And so started to see these worlds kind of collide, and especially from like a programmable side. And then as we kind of started to hit like 2020, what I saw was overall like the corporate industry, I'd say like the corporate mindset, all the big automotive makers, OEM suppliers, they had dumped a bunch of money into all kinds of startups, the Ubers of the world to a bunch of others. And I think from my vantage point, it seemed like a lot of the easy innovation money dried up. And it dried up from the automotive side because lot of this stuff wasn't really like going anywhere. Like these startups with all this innovation, it's really hard for like a 10-person team to work with a multi-billion-dollar global corporation. And I think it became clear to the industry and startups. And so when that easy money dried up, that's when we started to see like the shift in like the Uber landscape and some of the pullback in the investment capital. And what we're seeing now is maybe, I don't know if it's like mobility 2.0, but kind of seeing this now, this smarter cycle of startups entering the space with corporate partners. And in this like smarter cycle, the startups are like smarter from the sense that there's a lot more common knowledge out there that if you're a startup and you get a contract with a big OEM or supplier, that doesn't mean your startup's going to be successful. That OEM or supplier might be testing lots of them. And so the hurdles for startup to raise have changed. And then on the corporate side, similar, they understand that even if they work with one startup, that's not going to change their entire company. They might need to work with a lot of them. And what's now being shifted is from all these pieces kind of sort of working together, it's shifting towards much more of a platform holistic point of view. And so if we go back to the kind of like AWS web hosting thing, you have your website, but you have like the front end with like the design and the HTML and JavaScript, the interactivity, then it has to work on a mobile app, all these things, and the back end with the databases, how it serves and the APIs. There's very robust frameworks now to build all those pieces, but years ago, you had to kind of stitch it all together and hope it works. We're seeing, from my vantage, like very similar in mobility, a lot of the new players that might be entering the space or the thoughts entering the space, whether it's the huge OEMs or the small startups, this is a platform that's kind of emerging. There's a lot of stuff you can build on it. There's a lot of pieces of this platform, and it's not a winner take all, but it's, as the collaboration comes together, it's a 1 + 1 = 3 type effect. And so I think that's what's really exciting about what MIH is doing, is really thinking about EV as a platform. It's not one OEM figured it out and no one else knows how to do it. It's the better this platform is, the better everyone else becomes. And you can think of it very similar to Linux, whether Red Hat or whatever flavor you may use. It's everywhere, but lots of people all over the world, all kinds of companies contribute to one platform, and then you can build all kinds of different businesses on that platform. And so that's what I'm really excited about what kind of MIH is doing here. So kind of pause there for a minute. If there's questions, feel free to throw in chat or hop on video. I don't know if that works, if it's a mute all or not. But just want to kind of give a sense of kind of where things have gone, where they're going, and then kind of, I don't know if David wants to ask any questions or Joe, but kind of help direct what would be most helpful to you guys in the audience listening here.
Sure, we can try our hand at the audience. So if anyone has questions, you can raise your digital hand or just unmute yourself and ask questions to Ted. If not, we can interject with some direction and we can go from there. So if anyone, we'll give like a pause. If not, I'll ask a question.
Well, as Jack Chen, it's the CEO of MIH. I really appreciate, Ted, your sharing. And I know you used to work for Techstars, but not now. But I still appreciate all your support to this event. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. And I think that's kind of my whole lens is, I guess maybe more my mission is really changing the perception of what's possible in Detroit and kind of more Michigan. And so I guess the one thing I didn't really touch on is over the last 8-9 years, just being on the front edge of innovation, very, very early stage startups. Eventually, all those startups come through Detroit. If you're doing anything automotive or related to mobility, eventually you come here, whether it's a scooter startup or something bigger at a new type of OEM EV thing. Eventually you kind of pass through here, just like if you're a startup, eventually you're going to go through Silicon Valley, even though there's capital around the world, eventually you're going to touch that Silicon Valley. And similar to anything related to mobility or automotive, eventually you're going to touch Detroit. And then you're also some of those other major global epicenters as well. And so I was excited to help connect people back to Detroit, Michigan, what's going on. It's still very relevant for what startups may be building, and excited that MIH is looking at kind of expanding globally as they connect more of these pieces.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you very much.
Since we don't have questions, I have a question that you touched upon, and I'd love to hear more about that, which is you talked about how that comparison of a very big corporate working with a very small 10-team startup, right? How can a program like MIH or Techstars be like the catalyst or that glue between them, or how do people play a part in that facilitation? And also, how would a startup kind of find their way to that big corporate and find the right champions to champion their startup within that organization that's so big?
Yeah, what I saw with startups, early stage, kind of just like inception stage, very small, the benefit of like working with like a program like a MIH or a program that connects startups and corporate partners is less about, from a startup perspective, it's not so much, okay, we can get a pilot and run it, but looking at it more through the lens of feedback and education. And I think a lot of startups kind of make the mistake of, wow, we got a conversation with this executive at Ford. Wow, we're in the door. I think that the missed opportunity is maybe that might turn into something, but the startup kind of feeling frustrated if it's not turning into something is looking the other way. Like, what are you learning from that engagement, those conversations? Is the corporation, is that industry excited about what you're doing, lukewarm, has no idea how to even think about what you're building? Thinking of these as like information feedback loops. I think that's really, really important. And especially if you're building something that's going after a massive industry that's going through change, you need to understand the stuff at the edge that you're changing, but also what's the stuff at the core that might not be changing. And I think a lot of, like I said, startups kind of understand the edge and they think they can change the core, but that's not how the world works. Doesn't matter, automotive, fintech, or whatever industry in, eventually that stuff can kind of start to seep in. And so a program like MIH is good from how do you get understanding more, maybe what's the core of these organizations, how are they thinking much more nuanced, what can be kind of learned and applied to your startup at the edge, and really kind of start to build some of that connective tissue there.
Yeah, and I would also like to kind of chime in here as to how we MIH, when we're thinking about, this is exactly why we're creating this OpenEV platform. Really to create this environment and platform, the network to really connect the startups with corporations. And just to give a few examples, I mentioned earlier about, we are creating this consortium, this alliance by bringing members into this platform and through the working groups. So we have different working groups and with different areas. So an example would be in our autonomous driving working group, where it is actually led by a startup from Japan called Tier4. They're working with other members of our consortium in driving the open standards for autonomous driving vehicles, so that we can develop this common standards and APIs, so that with standards, there could be more innovation that's built on top of it. And then this startups working with other startups and big corporations within the working groups. And another example would be in our security working group, where we have a company, a startup company called Saibabo. They're working on a decentralized identity architecture for us. So we are using their work and using that as a foundation to build our decentralized identity infrastructure, so then other work can be built on top of it. So these are examples where we create these open working groups so that companies, regardless of their size, big or small, will have the opportunity to work together and build the next generation standards and reference designs.
Great. Let's transition back to Ted. I have a question for Ted about his days as a managing director. During your days as the MD of the Techstars Detroit Mobility Accelerator, what were like the exciting trends that were happening then, and do you have have those startups transitioned or pivoted into different sectors of EV? And segueing into that, do you see the trends in mobility changing throughout the years? Because you've invested in these mobility startups at a very early stage of the EV ecosystem, and now it's a few years removed. How's that journey been for you as an investor in that space so early?
Yeah, it's been fascinating to be kind of 8 years in the mobility space, and probably like one of the biggest questions used to get asked was, how many autonomous startups have you invested in? My answer is always like 0, maybe 1. There's a lot of like, well, why didn't you invest in autonomy? And I think what I was really thinking was, autonomy is going to be huge. There's some early bets in this space, but that's not just mobility. That's just one segment of it. Maybe it's investing in from going back to the web analogy, like high-speed databases, the concurrency and things like that. That doesn't mean the web is fixed now. It's just one piece of it. I think that piece is going to be a huge piece. Electrification is obviously like a very big piece, complex piece. But what I guess kind of the biggest thing going back, or maybe the biggest trend, maybe the trend insight was, there's technology revolutions around autonomy, EV, but at the end of the day, there's got to be the business revolution. And so what that means is a startup, and I think it was Steve Blanket said this, a startup is really just on the quest to find a business model that's repeatable. And so you can build amazing technology. That doesn't mean you're going to have a business there. And I think a lot of founders and startups confuse, well, if Cruise is acquired for $1 billion, why can't my tech be acquired for $1 billion? And I guess there's kind of all those things, there's always outliers, but also separately, a company like GM that acquired Cruise was looking at it. This is a new type of monetization revenue channel. And so if we're looking 10 years out, this helps us get there faster. And I think there's a lot of startups that kind of start to forget that you can build some really cool stuff, but if someone can't make $1 with it, you're not going to go far in the long run. And I think what I've seen play out over the last 8 years is the startups that have fared the best do get to a business model. They do have customers that pay for them. And so pilots with OEMs, suppliers, that's only short-lived. What is the business model here, whether it's for yourself or maybe a potential acquirer or partner? And as we see kind of worldwide, as markets start to shrink potentially, and maybe the United States is going into a recession, the venture capital and startups, that's not going to disappear. There's just going to start to be a return back to the basics. And the basics are, do you make money? How do you make money? If you're purely building technology to build technology as R&D, I think it's going to be a lot harder to fundraise and kind of survive a long time. If you're mixing that R&D with maybe some kind of consulting revenue, or starting to spin out some kind of new service or business model, that's when you're going to really start to see that longevity kick in. But I think as we look at what happened in kind of 2000, 2008, during kind of the financial meltdown in the US and other parts of the world, that's when Uber really started to get going with its initial seed round, Twilio, a bunch of other massive companies. And so as we're looking at potentially going into a downturn 14 years later, there's going to be all these amazing startups that are going to emerge towards the end of this decade. And they're going to have to be really fueled by the constraints of what's going on in the world, what's going on with their customers. But at the end of the day, are they really solving a problem that people want to pay for, whoever those customers are?
Got it. That's great insight and a great example too. Thank you. We have a hand raised from Universal Outcast. Is Universal want to come off mute and ask a question, or did you mispress?
No.
Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, all right. No. I just want to find out why do big companies keep themselves in a state of in-house. So I came across yesterday, I was in a meeting and with a company up that's based in Europe. So they said that they in-house, they can't assist people that are outside of the country. So I just want to find out, why is it that some companies are in-house or place themselves as in-house and not assist people, because I'm from South Africa, and not assist people like from outside within their borders. Why is that? Is it an economy thing, or is it a case of building their own country first before they go outside? So just understanding that, I don't know if you can give me an answer of from that. Thank you.
Yeah, is your question kind of more just around how do the startups and corporations better work together? Just so I want to make sure I touch on the right points.
Yes. So yeah, just because I'm a startup, so I was looking for funding from a certain company within Europe. So they said that no, we can't assist you because the company that we run is in-house. So meaning that they don't support companies or startups outside of Europe. So I was mind boggled, like why is it that case that, you know, like we all want to be helped, we all startups, and we need assistance in certain parts, especially funding. So yeah, why is it that they keep themselves in an in-house position instead of assisting startups outside of Europe?
Yeah, the biggest thing to think about when working with a corporation like that is things aren't going to make sense. And so what I mean by that is it seems obvious, like this should work together, but why doesn't it? And ultimately, like there's all kinds of things that we don't know what's going inside of that corporation. And so that corporation has customers, revenue, pays bills. Well, they're owned by a different set of individuals. They have a board of directors. And so at the end of the day, like their whole thing, the CEO management is, we have to keep growing our business. And then inside that business, there could be lots of pockets of interesting innovation and things that maybe should work with outside startups. But then if top-down strategy changes or management changes, or that big corporation merges with another, everything kind of trickles down, things get squashed, moved around. And so I think when I see a lot of those, and even when I have the same frustrations, it's at the end of the day, there's just like, this is a huge entity. And so while this makes sense, it may not be a priority, maybe it's not the right decision maker, and it's hard to get those together. The same thing can be said when these big corporations do something that you think is stupid. Like, why did they do that? It's the same reason, like, why didn't they do this? End of the day, there's a bunch of people trying to coordinate. They have families, lives, 9 to 5, have to make some revenue. maybe they're looking for their next job. And so you're trying to, like, this whole mess, you're trying to work with it, but it's not like one thing and one thing, it's just like a complete glob. There's a blog post I'll post in here that wrote a while ago, but just like some strategies working with corporations. And this is more just kind of more broad-based, but maybe some of these might apply, but definitely appreciate the question. And yeah, corporations, they can be really tricky to work with. And so a consortium like MIH can be more impactful because it's just a lot of different individuals at these corporations are all on board for much more of a universal platform. And so can kind of help get maybe out of some of those weedy conversations.
Totally agree. I think that was a great question. Thank you for that. Any other questions? That was a great one. Let's keep them coming.
It looks like there's a couple questions maybe in the chat. I don't know if you guys, Joe, saw that, like, how does MIH define open?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I can quickly answer that. So yes, so one of the first things that within the working groups of MIH is that to work towards defining a standards for the automotive industry, because as we know that the automotive industry has been around for a very long time, and with the tier systems and siloed development from the OEMs and tier ones. So there hasn't really been like open standards that we have seen happening in the PC and the smartphone world. And given that Foxconn's experience has been building from the PCs to smartphones and now into EVs, and we believe that that evolution of being from a closed ecosystem to an open ecosystem that we have seen from PCs and smartphone, will likely happen for the electric vehicles as well. So that's why Foxconn really created this consortium to really accelerate this change, so that there could be standards that's built so that players in the industry will be able to have a common platform and common APIs and interfaces, so that hardware and software, and the different parts of it can be developed independently, and then when you put them back together, it will still work. So that's the idea. And like one of the first things that the working groups of MIH that we work on are to define APIs. So for the example of autonomous driving, working groups were initially defining sensor APIs and also drive-by-wire APIs, so that there's a common interface for the autonomous driving algorithms, to be able to receive the different signals from sensors through a standard API, and to be able to control the powertrain systems underneath it. Yeah, so that would be one of the examples that we're working on.
And just to kind of add on a little bit, I'll post another blog post I wrote in here. It's kind of crazy. This was almost 5 years ago, but I was talking very similar to what William had posted in here, was really like the future of automotive is going to be powered by like open source software. And even just kind of skimming through this article right now, I think a lot of these entities might be out of business, and like what Ford was doing doesn't apply anymore in others. But this was 5 years ago. Just like there's a lot of interest and movement in this space going to more open source and platform driven. But again, kind of going back to what I said earlier around kind of the edges influencing the core. To me, it makes a ton of sense. Former developer investor, it's going to go open source, but to entrench executives in the automotive industry, that doesn't make sense right away. And there was a lot of like, it's us versus them mentality. And then that started to shift towards, we need to do things through partnerships. And now it's starting to become clear, it's not just partnerships, but with kind of common platforms out there. And if you look to the Googles of the world and Apples of the world, they all run on open source software, open standards. Coming out this fall is like the new standard called Matter for any of your smart home devices that connect with each other. So instead of Apple's ecosystem or Amazon's ecosystem or Samsung, All those can exist, but now this matter kind of connects all these through an open standard. You can see the same patterns emerge in the automotive industry. And so from an EV standpoint, what MIH is trying to do is now taking where maybe thought leadership and things existed years ago, and now there's actually a platform, and what can you build on it? And so I think it's a really powerful shift in the industry.
Amazing. I see Zach, you have a question for Ted. Do you want to come off mute and just ask it, or do you want to read it?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much. So I was just curious, Ted, your view or any insights. GM just announced their EV Live service, which is kind of a virtual one-to-one service to try and educate prospective EV buyers. And I was just curious, from your time so far and exposure to the industry, what are the problems in the EV sales funnel that you've seen that are that need to accelerate or help that kind of ICE to EV revolution, that shift?
Yeah, I mean, like the sales funnel is like complicated for a bunch of reasons, which is probably why you're looking to innovate in this space. I always caution startups, like the biggest competitor to your startup is the one that's almost always overlooked, and that's the status quo. Like, what do customers do today? And so I'm in the market for a new car in the next few months. Too many kids, can't fit them in. Would I buy EV or not? I was like, well, if I go EV, I was like, how do I charge it at home? And like now with tax rebates kind of drying up, and like issues with long-term batteries, like, does it make sense to buy an EV? And so for me, like just as someone that might buy one, it's like not even a marketing thing, but there's all these other complexities there. And so I think that's like one big thing is like, what are customers doing today? And so the governments can have subsidies, the OEMs can have better direct-to-consumer buys like Tesla and Rivian and Ford and GM and others. But that doesn't necessarily mean that problem's solved. It's still like, well, where's the person with a dollar? Where are they spending their dollar? And so as things kind of potentially hit maybe a recession or global recession, the bigger issue may be like, I want an EV, and it makes sense to have an EV for all these reasons. Maybe I don't have enough money now. The cost of supply chain is pushing costs up, but I'm going down. And so now the gap to get one is higher. And so one way to close that gap would be, well, if you could kind of make them cheaper and I could give you more money to buy it, maybe you're more likely. But it also could be, is it just flip it sideways? It's not about owning the EV now. Maybe it's like paying $500 a month to have access to one, which is kind of like the Uber-ish type realm of like renting to own. But does that really solve the problem? Because then there's other issues there. I guess it's kind of thinking about really tracing the dollar. And so if it's a sales issue, it's like, well, who's selling something and who's ultimately buying it? And there's a bunch of pieces in the middle. And so how could you drive up EV sales? Well, if you can make them cheaper, you could drive up sales. If you can somehow give me as a consumer more buying power, whether it's through rebates or reducing like insurance or, I don't know, global credits because you're buying it, now my buying power is boosted. I guess I would look at what's the gap and how do you potentially move one layer or the other, and not how can I move both. But if I'm a startup laser focused, I can move it closer for this type of customer and tracing like this dollar.
And I guess because we have your attention here, I'm curious. One of the things you mentioned there is the cost, and so the total cost of ownership with EVs is one of those things. If you can show to a prospective buyer how different that is compared to the front end cost, then you can start to help close that gap. I guess the other one also is there's a perception problem around what people think they need as a range, and it's very few people who really realize how many short trips they do and how the long trips are outliers. It seems to be resulting in the industry offering far too many cars with big batteries rather than smaller batteries, not just in smaller cars, but also mid-range or luxury cars, and thereby kind of opening up the bottom end of the market. Sometimes referred to as battery right sizing, or essentially trying to reveal that there's this massive unmet need.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely spot on, where the industry is making decisions maybe based on what they think consumers are saying. Consumers don't really know what they're doing. I mean, I don't even know out there. There's enough research, and so there is an educational issue and a gap there. And so, is it kind of coming up with a modular battery system where I can buy a car with less batteries and it's cheaper? And if I think I'm going to like go on a bunch of summer trips with my kids, instead of like buying new batteries for 2 weeks, I can get more batteries, and so I can put them in my electric vehicle. And so there's something around like on demand, like battery delivery to increase your range when you need it, and then you kind of lease those batteries in a fractional point of time. So I guess like, would fractional battery usage become something? And as I'm talking out loud, I'm like, actually, that makes a lot of sense, but there's a whole bunch of logistical issues. But assuming like the EV platform worked and you could add more batteries, increase range to some degree, there could be an entirely new startup that is, hey, planning your summer road trip, or you're on Expedia or TripAdvisor. Hey, you can rent 2 more batteries to go an extra 400 miles for 5,000, or I don't know, $500 or whatever the number is. Now you can there's a whole new business that could emerge. Is the tech there? Maybe, but then is the industry there? So anyways, I don't know if that helps kind of think through some of that.
Yeah, no, it is. Thank you.
And if anyone builds that, definitely let me know, reach out. I'd be curious. I just don't know, technically it would have to be up to MIH. I don't even know if that's possible yet with the technology out there, if you can add batteries swappable just yet.
NIO is leading that in China already, and has already started in Europe, Norway, where they have the first kind of battery changing station. But the problem then is that it becomes OEM specific, because it requires the OEMs to agree to a standard so they can swap between platforms, and that doesn't look like it's going to happen in a big rush. But yeah, single providers are trying it.
That's great. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of issues. I think I remember there's like a antidote to the SAE that sets standards for automotive vehicles. I don't know what it was. It took years and years to figure out how to add a little triangle next to the gas symbol to know which side of the car to fill the gas up on. And every time I go to the gas pump, I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing took how many years for the industry just to settle on, we're going to have an arrow and that indicates where the gas pump is, or sorry, the gas tank is. I think majority of people don't even know that. And this industry spent all those years, time, money, who knows, maybe there was better ideas. And now people don't even know about that. So anyways, that one always comes to mind. It's just like a very simple, but it took them that long for a little symbol. How long is it going to take to figure out a standard battery?
Yeah, talking on that subject, I just got to know that information this year, that the arrow means that. Epiphany right there this year. I have a question around, since we were talking about how to convince consumers and buyers to come in and buy EVs and transition from traditional vehicles to EVs. Another topic that comes up a lot is in the sense of innovation and how startups are pushing innovation and that status quo. But as a consumer requirement, it's having a very stable or reliable car, right? So have you seen there's like a balance there that the mobility industry has to play, where innovation is very good and very exciting, but what is that standard? What is that compromise where a big corporate has to come in and say, we need to be reliable at the same time? And how have you seen that play out for startups in that sense, where they can't innovate that fast because the standards of the market or the industry have not yet been, the technology is not there yet for them to be stable or reliable in that sense?
Yeah, a lot of it's just going to be whether it's government mandated or something, like eventually something happens that now everything has to be corrected. And so in the news, when Tesla has accidents, it's still not quite clear of like the legal law and implications. And there's starting to be, as there's more and more cases, like what it should be. And then eventually something will go into place where it's like, okay, these are the rules to follow for reliability or safety sort of thing. And so it's kind of like a chicken and egg problem. Like, makes sense, this should exist, but why doesn't it exist? And so the biggest challenge with startups, and probably the biggest variables of success, and I forget, this was maybe Steve Blank, or not Steve Blank, like what's the biggest contributor to the success of a startup is actually timing. And you don't really know, are you too early, too late, until it's in the future. And we got a lot of questions around like, how did you know to like launch this Techstars Mobility program? And it's like, we didn't know that was the right time. We knew it was like Detroit's a key market. Ford was very bullish, Bill Ford, on using the word mobility. But it wasn't that there was all these startups and this should exist. It just happened to be the right city, the right place, the right time of the market. A lot of these things came together. And then as you connect the dots, it worked well. And so as you kind of look forward, with all the stuff that's happened over the last 10 years, electrification is going to be coming sooner than anything else now. But 8 years ago, that wasn't clear. It was kind of like, oh, autonomy is going to be here before that, when in reality, that doesn't really make sense technically. And so if electrification is coming sooner, now potentially platforms like MIH make it easier. Where would you innovate as a startup? But kind of still going back to, what do people do today? What do your customers do today? Whether it's an end user like me or a big corporation or anywhere in between, there's still a lot to juggle. And then looking forward 10 years, maybe there's like a global energy crisis around oil, and now there's a bigger push to EV, or maybe there's like a huge innovation and like getting more like miles per gallon on the gasoline side, and now all of a sudden EV slows back down. There's all these macro things that you can't control either, that just affect the timing of what you're trying to build.
Amazing. We have time for one more question. Anyone have a question for Ted? Type in the chat, think it in, or just come off mute.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Yes, I have a question. He spoke about collaboration. I've noticed also that actresses and actors are collaborating with EV companies, like for instance, your Arnold Schwarzenegger, when it was during the Super Bowl with BMW. Are we going to see more of those types of collaborations going forward, like your musicians, your actors and actors? That's one question. And another question, when is the best time to collaborate, like you as a startup? So when's the right time to say, all right, I'm a startup, I think now is the right time? When is the right time to collaborate or partner with whether it's a big company or maybe another startup? That's about it.
When's the right time to collaborate? Big startup or a big corporation and a startup? It's when you're bigger to compete with it. So think of the corporation as it's an elephant. You're a startup as a mouse. Like, you're trying to like dance together, work together, and that analogy is all out there on the internet. And so as you're bigger, it becomes easier to collaborate. If you look at Uber, it wasn't day one trying to work with a Ford or the taxi business in San Francisco or New York. It was just, let's build up what we're building. And then later, now the big industry players have to figure out how to work with Uber. But it depends on kind of the business model of what you're doing. I'd say generally, like, I guess maybe put a different way, I'm not aware of like a startup is more successful because they worked with a corporation sooner. And so if you're in the auto industry, mobility industry, and you work with someone sooner, does that mean you're more successful? Almost more often than not, you're less successful because you get trapped into kind of the inherent bias inside of that corporation, how they think about what's being built versus being independent, using those constraints to your advantage. Now you're kind of just being constrained to their think and how to work with them, and then you lose sight of like what you're actually going after. So I don't think there's a right timing, but it potentially going too early is probably the most common challenge that I see. So it looks like we got maybe just a few more minutes here. I don't know if there's any other questions or anything. Happy to answer any more, but definitely appreciate everyone hopping on today, and always excited to share information, and hopefully this has been helpful. In my head it sounds helpful, but I don't know. You guys are the customer, so you got to tell them what's helpful, what's not.
Perfect. I think we can wrap up. Thank you, Ted, for today's sharing, and we'll open up for questions now specific to MIH and the program, and if you have any questions along for Joe. But thank you, Ted, for the sharing. I think it for a lot of founders here, and me included, is to see the innovations and experience that you have from investing in mobility at such an early stage, getting to know, like what you said just now was really, really impactful, is don't go in as a startup trying to work with such a big company and corporation. You might get lost. You might not be able to see and how to innovate. And some platform like MIH might be that perfect fit, where they can be your mediary or your catalyst. With their help, you might be able to reach a corporate like Foxconn, right? So thank you, Ted, for your sharing. You can head out if you want, but thank you for that. And yeah, we'll jump and transition back into MIH. So let me share my screen again here. And this is going to be the sharing of the application. So this is going to be the link to the website and the application. So if you have, I remember there was questions, I think Phil had questions along with MIH and how to open innovate. And I think Joe did a good job explaining it, but like if anyone else has questions about MIH and the program, now is the time to ask and interact and talk about that. The links are in the chat as well. So click on those if you can't use your phone, right? But yeah, Joe, you want to talk about more on the program, when applications are closing, and how long is that program, and what can they expect in the interaction with the MIH throughout that program?
Yeah, sounds good. All right. So yeah, like if anyone has any questions, yeah, I'm gonna leave my email in the chat. So feel free to send emails to me. So I would be following up with you if you have any additional questions. So yeah, so the application to the program closes on August 7th. And we will be selecting 20 startups into the cohort where Techstars and MIH will be offering master classes and cohort workshops and programs to kind of help the startups, accelerate your progress. And throughout this program, we really want to bring in the resources of MIH network, as there are 2,400 members within the MIH, working on different areas of the electric vehicle development. So we're super happy to make connections for the startups that's in the program, and really potentially connecting with Foxconn, to explore further go-to-market opportunities or even investment discussions. So we're really looking forward to having all of the startups join this program. And then for the final final pitch day, where we will be selecting 10 teams, and we'll be flying them to Taiwan to attend the final demo day in person. And that would be a great opportunity to show your product and services to our members, to investors, and to the world. And when you're here in Taiwan, we in MIH, and we will be having networking events for you guys, and you get to meet with other suppliers that's already in the ecosystem. So that creates another opportunity for the startups, to network and create more potential collaboration opportunities.
Amazing. And I would add on that, which is throughout that program in August and through to October, is we'll be working alongside MIH to kind of streamline what Ted just talked about in his talk, is about how can we help startups work with or collaborate or innovate with corporates in a very big size, right? Particularly the members of MIH, or particularly Foxconn in general, right? These are all of the stakeholders within this program that we as Techstars and MIH are working alongside the startups that are in this program to innovate alongside them and try to figure out who are the right stakeholders or representatives that we can connect you with, so you can kind of find out where in this big corporate that you can work with, right? So that's the nuances of that program that can open doors for a startup or your endeavor. So very exciting to be part of this journey and working alongside that ecosystem, that platform, that open-ended platform system that MIH is creating right now. So that's just nuance into the program. Excited. If you're interested, apply. Applications are closing soon. So apply or share it with someone you think can benefit from this program, right? To reiterate, it's a non-equity program. It's you come in, you apply, you get selected. We help you through that process. And if you're lucky and you perform well, you get to come to Taiwan. You get to meet Joe in person, right? So thank you guys for joining today. We're a minute over time. Oh, there's a question. Let's answer that. Says Joe, you want to answer that?
Yeah. So let me just quickly answer that. So initially, so MIH, we are focusing on the development of technologies around EVs, but definitely, so there's something that I mentioned earlier, is that we have working groups. So working groups are focusing on EV technologies, but we also have another type of group called interest groups, where interest group we talk about, and we have members talking about the broader mobility industry topics. So we have interest groups such as carbon neutralities and next generation communication. So something that's kind of more adjacent, more to the future, but something that we want to pay attention to. So those will happen in interest group. So hopefully that answered your question.
Great. I think that also answers a lot of startup questions as well. Like for example, Zach's startup about how do you kind of price and convince people to buy EVs, right? It's not directly related to the EV car, but it's very relatable to that industry. And that's something that is part of those focus groups or interest groups, right? So for sure, anything of that. So thank you guys for joining. Thank you for those questions. I love the questions that all of you guys raised today. Thank you, Ted, again, for the insight and the sharings of his experience in this mobility industry. So thank you guys. I'll see you guys soon. Have a good day, good night, or good evening. Bye, guys.
All right. Thanks, everyone.